Throughout scientific history, the greatest breakthroughs have come from the scientists willing to cross boundaries and take risks that no other scientist has before. In Mary Shelley's novel, Frankenstein, the author tells a realistic story about a scientist seeking greatness, whose greatest success unexpectedly becomes the cause of his own downfall. The story of Victor Frankenstein is clearly a warning to modern day scientists and not an homage. This novel warns scientists that ambition without accountability will not only risk a harsher failure, but lead to your own self-destruction. Now, before we jump into it, it's important that I define our terms to make sure that you properly understand the nature of my arguments. Alright, so a warning is an advance notice, statement, or sign that indicates potential danger or problem before it occurs. Its purpose is to advise caution and prompt protective action. And an homage is a show or demonstration of great respect, admiration, or dedication to someone or something. It often involves an artistic expression, such as a novel, created to honor and influence. And both of these definitions were taken from dictionary.com. Alright, so to support my take that Frankenstein is a warning to modern day scientists and not an homage, I have separated my thoughts into three distinct arguments. My first argument is that good intentions don't excuse a reckless journey. This refers to Victor's original intention to create human immortality. My second argument is that this novel punishes Victor Frankenstein's success to act as a warning to all the bad that scientists could go through. And my third and final argument is that Robert Dalton, the first character that we're introduced to, is an example that the author places to show how she wanted modern-day scientists to receive the message behind the story of Victor Frankenstein. And I'll finish off by restating all my arguments and giving a new perspective on the same themes of this novel. To begin, it's easy to determine that Victor is the villain of his own story, but he wasn't at first. At first, he wanted to banish disease from the human body and render man invulnerable to any but a violent death, as he mentioned on page 35. These are the kinds of goals that we'd praise in any modern-day researcher. However, a bad approach to these ambitions can change everything for the worse. His wrongful approach to glory is proven in the following quote, where Henry Clerval, Victor's closest acquaintance, notices something wrong with him. Victor replies with, "You have guessed right. I have lately been so engaged in one project that I have not allowed myself sufficient rest," on page 64. This quote proves that Victor is self-aware of his own unhealthy obsession that he has developed on his so-called project, and consciously decides to ignore his new creation. This eventually leads to a chain of tragedies that teach him how an unplanned journey for glory will ruin his life, and he now understands this and doesn't want his apprentice, Walton, to do the same. He specifically expresses this when he says, "Farewell, Walton. Seek happiness in peaceful activities and avoid ambition, even if it be only the apparently harmless one of distinguishing yourself in science and discoveries," on page 291. Near the end of this quote, he kind of describes himself, which shows that he now doesn't want others to make the same mistake that he has in his past. I'll go over some of the effects of unchecked ambition in my second argument, which is that the novel punishes Victor's success. Victor's first punishment is the loss of his sanity, shown first on page 65 when he says, "My loud, unrestrained, heartless laughter frightened and astonished him. 'My dear Victor,' cried he, 'what in the world is the matter? Why do you laugh in that manner? Are you ill? What is the cause of all this?'" That was Henry Clerval's reaction to Victor's punishment play out firsthand, which astonished him, because Victor is literally losing his mind. His next punishment is disguised when he becomes disgusted and regretful of his own actions. This is shown when he says, "Why do you need to remind me that I created you? Cursed be the day, disgusting devil, in which you first saw light," on page 119. This quote shows that Victor now acknowledges the fact that his creation is no longer a blessing, but he calls it a curse. And this curse follows him everywhere, even into the one part of his life that should be untouched by science. When he was asked by his father to finally marry Elizabeth, Victor doesn't feel joy, he feels dread. To me, the idea of an immediate marriage to my Elizabeth was upsetting. I was bound by a solemn promise I had not yet fulfilled, yet dared not break, on page 198. His discovery doesn't just cost him his peace of mind, but it also reaches forward and poisons a happiness that hasn't even happened yet. The effects of his punishment throughout the novel is more clear when you see that in the beginning, he's excited to show the world his new discoveries. Such were the professor's words, and I was swept away by them. I was fascinated. And now he says to himself, you, Victor Frankenstein, will be the pioneer. You will explore unknown powers. You will unfold to the world the deepest mysteries of creation. However, this idea shifts to having to hide his creation from the world when he says, my tale was not one to announce publicly. Its astounding horror would look upon madness to most people. On page 47. In short, this novel's punishment has completely changed the way that Victor views the world to the point where he doesn't even allow himself to be happy anymore. Not to mention the chain of death of the most important people in Victor's life throughout the novel. This includes William Frankenstein, which is Victor's little brother, Justine Mortiz, who was a loyal Frankenstein family maid, and according to Elizabeth, was one of the purest souls in the entire novel. Henry Clerval, who was Victor's best friend for life since childhood, and was there for Victor to support him through his first couple episodes of insanity. Elizabeth Lavenza, Victor's new wife who was killed during the honeymoon and his lifelong love. And finally, Alphonse Frankenstein, Victor's father who died overwhelmed by grief after all these previous tragedies. And it should be mentioned that 3 of these people were directly killed by Victor's own creation. If you ask me, this is a pretty strange way to try and pay homage to all the young modern scientists. And finally, my third and most obvious argument is that Walton is the model for how a scientist should hear this warning. The first hint of this is when Victor Frankenstein sort of breaks the fourth wall when he says this on page 53. You expect to be informed of the secret that I now know, but no, that cannot be. I would have you learn of how dangerous this knowledge can be. This is clearly a warning to all the modern day scientists reading of the dangers that too much science can have on someone's life. If it wasn't obvious enough, Victor literally said this on the verge of death, which should be a perfect example to the scientists of what could happen if they remain too curious about the life around them. Another indirect message was on page 288, when Victor says, you may give up your purpose, but mine is assigned to me by heaven, and I dare not. Here, he uses Dalton as a tool in order to tell the modern-day scientists to give up on what they think is their purpose. And finally, my last quote is Dalton heeding the warnings that Victor has given throughout this entire novel. On page 288, he says, I cannot refuse their demands. I cannot lead them into danger if they are not willing, so I must return. This is a final effort by the author to try to educate the modern-day scientists on what they should do in this situation. In other words, Shelley's novel, Frankenstein, was created to warn modern-day scientists and a general youth that unchecked ambition will eventually lead to the suffering of you and everyone around you. Essentially, pushing towards your ambition without a valid plan will ensure that evil thenceforth will become your good, as they say on page 295. However, it should still be considered whether or not the result would change if Victor Frankenstein approached his ambitions more responsibly.